Record. Do you guys see the record? Is it say it's recording now?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, it doesn't show on my screen, so I wanted to make sure it showed. Actually, it might show on my screen, and there's a little tiny red dot now. All right, perfect. We are in buyer agency agreements. This cover page is showing you what I would like to get through today, and I am very sure we are going to get through all of this today, and we may actually have some extra time at the end. So we have exclusive right to represent purchaser. We're going to review our affiliated business arrangement disclosures and cybersecurity notice. Residential property disclosure form, which you'll hear me refer to as the long form in DPOR. Useful information about real estate transactions. Now I have a break in between those first 5 documents and the next documents because those first 5 documents are your required documents for compliance with a buyer agency package. So when you look in Command at the checklist for your buyer agency package and what's required before you submit it for my review, those are the 5 documents that you see. There's also a form group that is created in DocuSign that matches this as well. So we try to make it very easy for you guys to not have to go in and figure out what documents do I need, what do I have to have signed. It's all very consistent. Okay, the idea is that paperwork, right, is not the fun part. So we want to make sure that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and that it's as easy as possible to grab the forms you need when you're going to meet your clients. The next documents that we're going to review after we get through that package will be the disclosures of designated agency, dual agency, and the document that's called Disclosure of Broker's Relationship, which is also commonly referred to as the disclosure of unrepresented parties. There's a one-time showing authorization that happens if you're showing a for sale by owner, and then the buyer's acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences. Okay. Everybody also got this morning a document from me. It was the second email that I sent. If you were on the first round, if you were on the second round, I included it. It is this document right here. Hopefully my screen changed for you. And it is the broker information for buyer and listing agreements. Keep this handy until you commit it to memory so that you know based on your market center what is going to be filled in on page 1 and the last page of these agreements. Okay, everybody with me so far? Everybody good? I'm going to suggest that you either fill in the agreement, if you have one that you were able to print this morning when you received my email or you had printed one already, or make notes very specifically of what to fill in these sections so that you have a reference. You can also go back and practice later if you would like to go into DocuSign. I highly suggest going in and creating one of these packages later today to send as a sample so that you have a sample that you can reference later and I can give you feedback if something needs to be changed, and then you will have one that you can go back and reference so that you know exactly what you should have filled in these documents. So in the exclusive right to represent buyer agreement, we have the date that it's made. This date does not matter if you create the document and you put today's date and your clients aren't signing it for 5 days because you're not meeting them for 5 more days. You don't need to go back and change this date. It is effective the date that truly that it is ratified, which is when the clients and myself sign. So here you're going to fill in the buyer's names, and I will encourage you to please put the buyer's names exactly how they will take title. So these are going to be names that are going to carry over likely from Command, how you've entered them into Command. So you need to possibly edit when you get into DocuSign to make sure that, you know, in Command, you might have someone's nickname or common name, as you call them. As an example, my husband's name is Nathan, and we call him Nate. So in command, I would have him listed as Nate, but when we come over to the buyer agreement, I would want him to be listed as Nathan. I also would be asking my clients, would you like your middle initial on the deed? Because if they want their middle initial on the deed, we should have them in DocuSign with their middle initial. So it would be Nathan M. Lauterstein and Shannon M. Lauterstein as the buyers, if it was myself and my husband purchasing. The next line is for the broker. This is where you would put KW United dash, and then your market center. So it's KW United dash Falls Church, KW United dash Fredericksburg, KW United dash Alexandria / Kingstown. If you don't put the location, that's okay. I prefer that our internal documents have the location on them. It just helps me to know where they belong, and it is our legal name. This is not an issue on our contracts later. We'll talk about if it doesn't have the location name. If you get an offer and it comes in and it doesn't have our location name, it's not a big deal. But here I would prefer it. Now, I would like everyone to make a big note on whatever you're taking notes on, that our brokerage name is not Keller Williams United. It is not. So we cannot spell out Keller Williams in our brokerage name on anything, on any marketing, on our agreements, in our email signature, anything. Our legal name is KW United. Now, on our logo that we prefer to use, it's KW United, and then underneath it says Keller Williams Realty, right? So that's fine. That's actually what we want. We want the public to know that we are KW United, an office of Keller Williams Realty. So please be very careful that everything is KW United. The next section talks about the appointment of the broker. So this is where the agreement is made that in consideration of services and facilities, the broker is granted the right to represent the buyer to purchase real property, right? Very simple statement. The next section talks about how the buyer is saying that they are not already under a representation agreement with someone else. So when we talk to our potential clients, right, one of the first things that we need to make sure we are doing is verifying that they are not under an agency agreement with someone else. So when they are entering into this buyer agency agreement and they've told us that they are not working with someone else, in addition to them telling us, they're signing a document saying that they're not under a representation agreement with someone else. They're also telling us in this first section that they've disclosed to us any information about properties that they've already seen with other agents, if they had been working with other agents, including any new home communities that they have seen. The reason that it says this is because there could be issues with procuring cause or commissions not being available to us if it was new construction. And so we need to be able to have those conversations appropriately with the clients. The next section talks about notices, and that everything should be in writing. Everything in real estate to be binding has to be in writing and signed by all parties. And so this next section is just the email addresses, mailing addresses, and phone numbers for the client and for the brokerage. Now, this broker firm section, this is where you go back and reference this document right here, and you're looking for the address and the email address and the office phone number, okay, to put on page 1. Because every office has a different email address. This is not for my email address. This is not for Steve Gaskin's email address. This is not for your email address. This is for the brokerage email address that is registered with DPOR. That's what goes in that section. All right, I'm going to pause for a second. Does anyone have questions on what I have talked about so far?
So when I go to fill this out at DocuSign, it often demands that the email address under broker and the email address under your signature line remain the same, and I can't make them change. So I usually default to one or the other.
Okay, awesome. That's good to know. If it is still happening that way, please let me know which documents it's doing that on, and I can send a message to get that fixed. If the workaround that you need to use for that, until it is fixed, if it is still happening, is that you would put the brokerage email address under the broker firm. And if it is still copying in the supervising broker line, when you get into the envelope, you're going to add a text box, and then you would put my email address next to where it auto-populates the broker email address so that you have both.
Check.
Awesome. Thank you for letting me know about that, and I will, and we'll test that later. DocuSign is supposed to be updating any of these minor errors within 24 hours. So if it is still happening on one of the agreements, it should be quickly that they fix it.
So we can put we put your name next to it when it populates on the last page.
On the last page, yes, you'll do a text block in the envelope and just add my email address.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Awesome. So they ask for broker information and supervising broker information on the last page so that the public has a way to contact the brokerage if there was a problem, or if they couldn't reach you, or if there was an emergency. They don't want the clients to have to jump through hoops to try to locate someone. This isn't necessarily because they're upset with you and they need to, complain or tattle or anything like that. That you could have had an emergency and we didn't know about it and they need to reach us. The thing to remember is that all brokerage agreements in Virginia are between the client and the brokerage. It's not between the client and the agent. It's between the client and the brokerage. So that's why it's super important for there to be brokerage contact information. All right, I'm going to move on to term and termination. Okay, this agreement commences when signed, right? So when it's ratified, signed by all parties, and is subject to the compensation paragraph, which we'll get to, and expires at 11:59 on the expiration date. So we need to always have an expiration date here. Expiration date is something that I check. When I'm signing these agreements, that's one of the things that I look for, is an expiration date. This expiration date can be the same day that it is entered into. So if you have a buyer who's really hesitant about signing an agreement and still wants to see homes, it can expire on the same day. It can expire in a week. It can expire in a year. It doesn't matter as long as it has an expiration date that is after the day and time that it's signed, right? So when we change over years, a lot of times I'm getting expiration dates here that are in the past. So I'll have to return it to be corrected. The buyer agency agreement allows either party to terminate. Now this is different from our listing agreement, which we'll talk about on Wednesday. The buyer agency agreement allows the brokerage to decide they don't want to work with the buyer anymore. It also allows the buyer to terminate. So something just to understand, right? Either party has an out in this. If the buyer wishes to terminate the agreement prior to the expiration date without good cause, there can be an early termination fee. So what does that mean, without good cause? Well, I would say without good cause would be they just change their mind and want to go and work with their sister-in-law that just got licensed, right? That would be without good cause, as an example. If they thought they were going, they thought that they could move because they saw a lot of homes that really appealed to them, and then they just changed their mind, and because of what the market was doing, you might be able to qualify that as without good cause and collect an early termination fee. In most cases, though, it's very hard to prove that it's without good cause, because when backed into a corner, when a buyer has to pay a fee to get out of the agreement, they're going to come up with some reason that would fall into good cause, right? They're going to come up with something that upset them or angered them or whatever, right? And then it's he said, she said, and it gets messy. So in your business, you get to decide whether you are charging early termination fees, and you have to be consistent. If you are charging early termination fees, it can't be for one client and then not for another. It has to be consistent across the board, and there has to be a consistency on when you will try to enforce it. Many agents that I know have decided not to charge that early termination fee because it's very hard to enforce. And so it's just easier to not charge that. All right, any questions on term and termination? Okay, moving on. Broker duties. So this section talks about what they're actually hiring us to do. So the client's hiring us to promote their best interests, right? To represent them and only them. So we do that by performing to the terms of the agreement, by seeking properties at the price and terms acceptable to the buyer, by presenting timely all written offers and counteroffers to and from the buyer, right? Written offers, disclosing to the buyer all material facts related to the property or concerning the transaction to which they have actual knowledge, accounting for in a timely manner all money or property received in which the buyer has or may have an interest. Unless otherwise provided by law, the buyer consents in writing to the release of this information. The broker must also maintain confidentiality of all personal and financial information unless the broker has received permission from the buyer to release that information. So what does that mean? That means that you might know in a transaction why there's a delay because of financing, right? Something may have happened with a buyer's financing that causes them to need a delay. And in talking to the other agent, you cannot give specific information about their financing that caused the delay unless you have permission from that buyer. Now, should the buyer give permission to disclose certain information? Maybe, because maybe disclosing certain information will help the seller understand and grant that extension, right? So always make sure that you have permission from the client before you disclose the information. Brokers shall exercise ordinary care to comply with all applicable laws and regulations and treat the sellers honestly and not knowingly give them false information. So here is very important because while we represent the buyer, we're not puppets, if you will. We are not simply doing what they tell us to do at all costs. We still have to abide by the laws and the rules, and we still cannot mislead the sellers or anyone else involved in the transaction. So it's very important if we have buyers that are trying to get us to do things that are outside of what we are truly allowed to do. And that also includes violations of the Code of Ethics, right? We are still bound by the Code of Ethics, no matter what a client tells us to do. We may have to have serious conversations with our own clients if they're trying to get us to go outside of that. This next section is very important because it's tricky as an agent to navigate this. It says, in addition, the broker may show the same property to other buyers, represent other buyers on the same or different properties, represent sellers relative to other properties, or provide assistance to a seller or prospective seller by performing ministerial acts that are not inconsistent with the broker's duties under this agreement. Okay, that was a very long sentence. So what does that mean? Let's chunk it down. So the first part says, you might have 4 buyers that you're working with right now. And those 4 buyers are all qualified in the same price range and are looking in the same area. And 2 of those 4 buyers are interested in seeing the same house. And you take them to see that house, and they both want to make offers on it. So now, of the competing offers, you have 2 of the competing offers. So your clients are competing against each other. It's very tricky, but this agreement says that you don't have to tell one of your clients they can't see a property simply because another one is interested. So that's the first section. The second section that is a little confusing is where it talks about an agent may provide assistance to a seller or prospective seller by performing ministerial acts that are not inconsistent with the broker's duties. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is if you are taking a buyer to see a for sale by owner and the seller does not have access to the disclosure documents that they need to review and sign prior to your client signing and making the offer, you can provide those documents. You're not providing any advice to the seller on what they need to fill out, but you are providing the documents. They need to read and learn what their responsibilities are, then sign and provide it back. Okay, so it's a ministerial act to provide the documents. The agent can also put the items in DocuSign for them to sign. That's a ministerial act that they are providing. They're not actually giving any advice. The last sentence says that the buyer acknowledges the seller or seller's representative may not treat the existence, terms, or conditions of offers as confidential unless confidentiality is required by written confidentiality agreement between the parties. Okay, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that in our listing agreements, there is a box that says that the agent has permission to disclose offers or not disclose offers. So if the listing agent has been given permission to disclose offers, that means that the information that your client has provided in their offer is not confidential. Here's another example of when it's not confidential. If your buyer is submitting an offer and there's an escalation clause on someone else's offer and your client is in second place and your client's offer is the one that actually escalates someone else's, Okay, and for those of you that are newer to the business, you'll understand this next week when we go over the contract documents. But the full offer from your client actually has to be sent to the winning offer to justify that higher price. So your offer is no longer confidential. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Any heartburn for anybody on that section? Questions or comments before we go on to the buyer's duties?
Yes, Shannon, I did have a quick question. Let's say you have multiple buyers that you're showing the homes to that are interested in the same home. Do you have to disclose to each of the buyers that you have other buyers that are interested in the home as well?
Great question. So you don't have to, and there's a difference between what you have to do and what's a best practice. And what I would say is a best practice is to disclose to your clients that you have other buyers that are interested. I also would suggest, because this is very tricky for us as agents to be able to maneuver it, it's not going to happen often. But if it does, I might suggest that one of your friends from the market center be brought in to help with the offer making process for the clients that are competing against each other. Because if you have buyers that you're working with both of them, you know a lot about them, you know a lot about things they're willing to do. And if you simply have one that's given to someone else, you already know what you're up against, right? So that's a challenge, right? It's kind of, we'll talk about dual representation and some implications in that way too. So it's very similar in my opinion, where you would need to have two people that don't know anything about the other to really come in and represent them. The other piece to that is, in most cases, the buyer's financial ability that you're working with are different. So what one is willing to do, the other is probably not willing to do. So even if you have both of them that you're making offers on for, one's highest and best that they are willing to do is not going to be the same as what the other's highest and best is. So even if you are providing advice, it still doesn't change their financial ability and what they can do in making the offer. So in that case, it's going to probably give you a pit in your stomach while you're trying to navigate it. And at the same time, it won't change the outcome of what your client's financial abilities are. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And it makes sense for it to be best practice. I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, any other questions on that section? And for those of you that have been in business for a little while, I would like to hear ahas at the end of each day. So if you are learning something new, write it down, because I'd love to hear as we go through this, if you learned anything new as we talk about it. All right, buyer's duties. So the first thing it says is the buyer is going to work exclusively with the broker during the term of the agreement, hence the exclusive right to represent buyer. The buyer will pay the broker directly or indirectly the compensation set forth below. Compensation paragraph is my most hated paragraph of any of our documents. We'll get there in a minute. I want you guys to get paid. I just hate the way the paragraph is written. The buyer will comply with reasonable requests of the broker to supply pertinent financial or personal data in order to fulfill the terms of the agreement. And the buyer will be available during the broker's regular working hours to view properties. Okay, so if we chunk this down a little bit, right, the buyer is not going to work with other brokers during the term of the agreement. So this is not an open agreement where they're going to hire 5 different buyer agents and whoever finds them a property first that they win on gets to be their agent. That's not how this works. They hire you. You are the one that they're working with. You are going to work hard to help them achieve their goals. Okay. I'm not going to talk about compensation until we get to that paragraph. Comply with reasonable requests of the broker to supply the pertinent financial and personal information. Okay. So this means in your buyer consultation appointment, and maybe you need updated information during the process, you are asking and obtaining a pre-approval letter from this buyer's lender. You are speaking to the buyer's lender. You are encouraging your buyer to submit all information that they can ahead of time to their lender so that they can be as underwritten as possible prior to having a ratified contract. You also might suggest that they speak to one of our lender partners if they have gone on to like Quicken.com or Rocket Mortgage or something online that we don't have a relationship with and that we don't have confidence can get to the closing table. There are also big banks, credit unions and such that take a long time to get to the closing table. And we don't always have confidence in them. Our partners in our market centers are the ones that we have confidence can get to the closing table. So we can have them have a discussion, right? That happens prior to ratification, prior to making an offer. Even though the lender letter is not a part of the contract, it is something that the sellers and their agents are considering in the strength. So all other things being equal, a Rocket Home Loans versus a Highlands or Movement mortgage, or even Keller mortgage lender letter, they're going to go with Highlands or Movement or Keller mortgage, right? They're not going to go with Rocket. So just be aware that the lender does matter also. And then be available during brokers' regular working hours to view. So this is something that I'm going to encourage all of you in your business plans, and we're going to be talking about this piece, your business plan. Write down what your regular working hours are. This is important to make sure that we are complying with treating all clients fairly. When I was selling, I did not work Sundays unless it was an emergency situation or a unique situation where the client was truly unavailable on a Sunday, or if it's a market like this and the home is only available for showings, right, during a 4-hour block on a Sunday, then I would make an exception. But I did not work on Sundays. I worked on Saturdays. I worked Monday through Saturday. And Sundays was a day when my kids were little that I took them to my parents' house. And the way that my husband and I worked out the weekends, he had the kids on Saturdays. And so that was my work day. And then Sundays, he got a break. And I took the kids to my parents and I got a break and we got, to have family time. It was clear to everybody who I was working with that was my schedule. So I encourage you to have regular working hours. Buyer is advised against and assumes responsibility for taking, posting, publishing, or displaying any photo or video of a property without first obtaining seller's prior written consent. going to stop there for a second. That applies to agents as well, not just the buyer. So a lot of us are looking for unique marketing opportunities and lead gen opportunities. Agents may not go out to see open houses on the weekend, not go even to look at a vacant listing and post it on our social media and say, who wants to live in this beautiful house at 123 Main Street? Look at all the wonderful features. Contact me if you're interested, right? We cannot do that without permission, even if it's a KW United listing. We cannot do that. If it's a listing that belongs to another brokerage, in addition to having the permission to do that, we have to actually source that the listing, that the home is listed by another company. So think about that before you actually want to advertise some other company. We have plenty of listings within KW United if you want to do something like that, and we have to have permission. But the buyer cannot take photos or additional videos and things like that without this seller's permission. So what do you do if you have a situation where there's two buyers and one of them's out of town and you're only able to take one, or one can't get off work and you want to do a video tour with the other one? Just talk to the agent. Especially right now, a lot of sellers are amicable to the video tours. In the MLS, it actually gives an option for in-person tour, video tour, or both. So it might already tell you whether you can do a video, and I still would let the agent know that you'll be doing a video before you do it. And then it says that the buyer releases and holds harmless the broker and their agents from any liability which may result from them taking any of those photos or video if they didn't have consent. And the buyer also acknowledges that the seller may have video and or audio recording system in the property, even if the disclosure isn't made. So again, on our listing agreements, there's a place for the sellers to tell us if they have audio or recording devices, and it should be in the listing. And some sellers are great, and they're putting notes in the home to say recording device, video device, whatever. In our buyer consultation, we should be setting the expectations with our clients that every home we tour, we should treat as if there are video and audio recording systems, period. We should not take for granted that just because they didn't tell us, we should be behaving as though there are. And what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that we would be treating the home poorly if they weren't watching us, right? What it means is don't talk about certain things while you're in the home that you don't want the seller to know. For example, don't come in and say, oh my God, what were they thinking with that paint color? Oh my God, their furniture is hideous. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to totally gut that kitchen, whatever, right? You might hurt the seller's feelings and they don't wanna work with you. Okay, so just be careful. The other thing you might not wanna say while you're walking through, if you're an agent and a buyer, you might not wanna talk about the buyer's financial status. There are buyers out there, a few, not many, that are not trying to buy at the top of their means. And so you don't want them to talk about how they have so much extra money, right? That they're only off, they want to offer 500,000, but they can go to 800, right? You just don't want to talk about any of that while you're touring. Save that for when you're in the car or at the office or on the phone. Okay, and don't do it outside the house either, because ring bells and those things pick up audio recordings. All right, everybody good there? Okay, you guys are awesome.
Shannon,
Yes.
I have a question, it's Jessica. That with the video and with as far as the video goes, like I know some of my clients have, again, you know, not even realizing that it's without permission, but they just kind of like take their phone out and start recording because it's like the house of their dream or the house that they want, and they just want to remember because they saw so many different houses. In that case, we also still need written permission.
Yes, you do. You know, there might be some reason why certain areas weren't photographed or videoed in the listing. Everything does need to have permission. And if it's just a situation like that, most sellers are going to give permission.
Okay.
There's not really a high opportunity for there to be an issue. I would just say, better be safe to be safe than sorry, because that one time is when it's going to be a big deal, right? And those of you that come around me often know that Steve and I, one of our favorite sayings is, it's not a problem till it's a problem. And we just don't want you to ever get into that problem status.
Shannon, may I ask a question really quick? It's Nikisha.
Of course.
How does this apply in terms of video that's not recorded? I have a client who has family out of state and she wants to like FaceTime them in and be like, this is a house I'm thinking about putting an offer on.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something we still need permission for if it's not being recorded?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Good question. And again, you know, in the listing, it says in-person and video tour, you know, as an option. So sometimes it's, you know, it's already said that you can do it. And then I would just let the listing agent know that you plan, if it already gives permission for in-person and video, I would just shoot the agent an email and say, hey, you know, thanks for the permission, you know, in the listing already. And I just wanted to let you know that we'll be doing this. It's no problem. All right, the purpose of this agreement. Buyer is a retaining broker to acquire the following type of property. So here, I want you guys to be very vague. Usually, I want you to be very specific, okay? So take note that here is the one place that I want you to be very vague. And I want you to say residential property in Virginia. Now, if you have a client who falls into that hesitation category, right, where we talked about in the term and termination paragraph where they might only want to be for one day, you also can use the purpose paragraph to be for specific properties. So if they just want to test you out and see whether you guys are a good fit, or if you want to test them out and see if they are a good fit, remember, this is not all about clients interviewing us. We are interviewing clients as well, because we need to make sure that we are working with ready, willing, and able clients that we can help achieve their goal. Not every person that comes across us is a ready, willing, and able purchaser that isn't going to waste our time. So we are interviewing them as well. So here you can put specific properties if it makes them feel better, right? So whatever it is that you're going to go see for the day. But if this is just a regular buyer agency agreement, I put in my term and termination paragraph, I put 90 days. And I put in this purpose paragraph, I say residential property in Virginia.
Shannon.
Hi, Raekwon.
Hi, how are you?
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So my question would be, so this contract, no matter what state, is the same, right? Because we are in Virginia, right?
Great question. Great question. This only applies to Virginia.
Okay.
So if you are licensed in Maryland or DC, there is a separate agency agreement that you would have signed if the client also wanted to look in Maryland or DC. And we will have a separate contracts class for Maryland and DC. Some things are the same and some things are different. And Maryland, you have Maryland Association of Realtors, and you have GCAR for Montgomery County because they're special. And it's a little more involved, but this is specific for Virginia only. So great question, Raekwon. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. So basically you're saying that, so if somebody did say like, hey, like I'm looking anywhere, DC, Maryland, Virginia, doesn't matter, there would be 3 different contracts?
Yes.
Gotcha.
That's right. So an example of an unintended consequence in here of putting, you know, if you're having a buyer consultation and someone says, I want to buy a townhome in Fairfax County, and so you put in here a townhome in Fairfax County, and in your search you're not finding any townhomes in Fairfax County that either they're winning on or that they like, and they decide to expand their search into Loudoun County and Prince William County and surrounding areas, and you find them either a townhome in a different county or a single family home. The purpose of when you write townhome in Fairfax County and you find them something outside of that, this buyer agency agreement then no longer applies to them. So that's why I want you to be very vague in the purpose of a residential property in Virginia, because it covers any type of property that they buy: condo, townhouse, single family home, co-op, anywhere in Virginia, you're covered. Because I want you to do the least amount of paperwork possible. Okay? Compensation. All right, is everybody ready for this? Does anybody know what I'm going to say here? I think some of you do know what I'm going to say here. So I'm going to try, since we're recording, I'm going to try to be very nice. Okay. So, and I'm going to try to help you through this, because those of you, again, that have been working with clients know that this is a tough paragraph. And that's why, I mean, as a broker, from my broker perspective, this paragraph's fine, right? I know what it says. It's fine.
Hey, Shannon.
Yes.
So I write on here, 2% paid by seller.
And I'm going to explain why I want you to write something different.
Fair enough.
And I appreciate you telling us what you write here. So okay, so actually it's funny that you say that, because as a broker, the pre-printed language here, I'm fine with, because I understand it. I understand what they mean. I know what it covers. But as a broker who reviews the documents, and Alan, I'm not picking on you because I see a variation of a lot of different things on here that would essentially cause our agents to not get paid. And so I want our agents to have the ability to get paid. So, so we're going to talk about some circumstances here that would limit the ability to get paid when some of these variations are written. I also want you to be able to communicate to your clients properly, right? Because when we are confident about what we are sharing with our clients, then they don't see it as an issue. So we have to have that confidence level and the understanding of what it says to be able to communicate it to them properly. And I've only had one time ever in my career where I've had to write something additional about this paragraph, and I will share that with you guys in case you need it in your arsenal of tools. So the retainer fee. Buyer can pay a retainer fee. So it says that the broker acknowledges receipt of the retainer fee in the amount of blank, which will or won't be subtracted from the commission due. So this retainer fee is something that some agents, not many, but some will charge buyers an upfront fee in case they never get to the closing table, right? To cover their time. So in your business, you have to decide whether you're going to charge a retainer fee for people to retain your services. We're in a very competitive market right now. I would encourage you to think about this before you decide to charge a retainer fee and what you are looking to accomplish with that retainer fee. So are you looking to accomplish payment for your time? Are you looking to accomplish covering your expenses for gas? What are you looking to get them to feel committed to you because they paid this money? Like, what are you looking to accomplish with that retainer fee? And then it says it will or won't be subtracted from the compensation that is due with the sale. It is something that could be in addition to whatever the payment is for your services, or it's just a prepayment of that. Okay. So again, think about it. I personally have never charged a retainer fee. I don't see it a lot. And you can certainly talk to other agents that are within our market center. This is not something that we can talk about to agents that are not within our 3 market centers. But you can certainly, reach out to an ALC member, for best practice discussions. But compensation in general is not something that we can talk about outside of our market centers. Okay, the next paragraph, I'm going to read it, says the buyer shall pay compensation in the amount of blank to broker if buyer enters into a contract to acquire real property during the term of this agreement and goes to settlement on the contract anytime thereafter. In most cases, the seller pays the broker's fee, but in the event the seller does not pay any or all of the amount due, buyer hereby agrees to pay any and all remaining broker's fee due to the buyer's broker. Broker may retain any additional compensation offered by the seller or seller's representative, even if this causes compensation paid to the broker to exceed the fees specified above. Okay, we're going to stop there. And we're going to chunk this down. So the buyer shall pay compensation in the amount of blank. So here is where we fill in what the minimum is that we're willing to work for. The reason we put the minimum that we're willing to work for is because the last sentence says that the broker may retain any additional compensation offered by the seller or seller's representative, even if this causes the compensation to exceed the fee specified above. As an example, if you were to put 2% of the sale price in this line and the seller side is offering 3%, we are covered. Okay. If you were to put 3% here of the sale price and the seller side is only offering 2%, what this paragraph says in the sentence that says, in the event the seller pays brokers, in most cases, the seller pays broker fees, but in the event seller does not pay any or all of the amount due, the buyer agrees to pay any or all remaining broker fees due. What that scenario is that the buyer is now responsible to pay 1%. Okay, because we said in this example, our fee was 3%, and the seller side is offering 2%. And so there's a 1% difference that now the buyer is responsible to pay. So in your business, you have to decide what is the minimum that you are willing to work for. And what goes into that is whether or not you would be charging your buyer the difference. Now I'm going to stop my screen share for a minute so that I can see your faces, so I can see if we have an understanding about what it is that I'm explaining. If we put in this line 2% or MLS offering, and the MLS offering is 1%, Who decides which of those choices applies?
You get the 1%.
Anybody can unmute and answer. Who decides which applies? 2% or MLS offering?
You would get the 1%, the MLS offering.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
the one in the contract, I think.
Well, you get 2%, they would have to pay the other, wouldn't they?
Okay, so if it says 2% or MLS offering in that line, there's no clear meeting of the minds of what the compensation is because it says or.
I have a question.
Okay.
Why would somebody say 2% or MLS offering if ultimately you're just going to accept the MLS offering? Like, that's confusing.
Because there might be a misunderstanding of the paragraph. So if they say 2% or MLS offering and they're hoping that the MLS offering is more, right? So, sometimes they'll say 2% or MLS offering, whichever is greater, right? But that's unnecessary because the paragraph already says that you can receive anything that's offered above, right? When you have an or statement, there is not a clear meeting of the mind. So if the MLS offering is 1% and it says 2% or MLS offering, an agent might be thinking, I get the greater of, okay? That's not what they wrote. And the buyer might be thinking, well, you didn't tell me I had to pay anything out of pocket. I'm choosing that you get the MLS offering. And the agent says, well, no, I get 2%. And then who's the tiebreaker, right? Because there's no qualifier to say what determines which of the or statements is true. So I hate the word or unless there are triggers, right? If you put in, as Alan told us, that he puts 2% paid by the seller. If the seller side's offering 1%, then we can't force the seller to pay 2%. We also cannot obligate someone who's not a party to our agreement to do anything. So the seller is not a party to our buyer agency agreement. So trying to obligate a seller is not enforceable. So in that case, if we have told the buyer that our fee is 2% and it's paid by the seller, and there is a for sale by owner that has a limited service agreement with a company that puts in their listing into the MLS and they are offering $500, then we are really kind of out of luck, right? Because that seller is not, the seller has told us that they're willing to pay $500 and we can't go back to the buyer and say, let us negotiate on your behalf because they've already offered and it's in the MLS and we're bound by the offering in the MLS of the $500. Does that make sense?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, me too. I have a question.
Why?
Okay, Alicia first and then Veronica.
What happens if the buyer doesn't want to pay anymore and doesn't want to pay for the fee, for the realtor fee, for the broker's fee?
What happens if they don't, when you're doing your buyer consultation? Is
No.
that when you're having the discussion?
Yeah, I guess when you are doing the buyer's consultation and you are doing the agreement, and the seller says, and the buyer says, no, I am not going to pay any fees, any broker's fees. That should be done by the seller. The seller should pay so then I won't accept the transaction. I won't accept that buyer. Or is there any
Yes.
way, I mean.
So one of the things that we need to be very careful about is living and working in a market that doesn't exist. And that's a market of the past that the seller always pays. So we need to be making sure that we are consulting our buyers appropriately and making sure they understand what's happening in this changing environment. And while I will say that the majority of the sellers right now are entering into agreements with the listing companies to still have the listing companies offer co-broker compensation, there are more and more opportunities where the commission is being pushed down or not offered at all. There have been $1 commissions. I froze. Is the minimum to go in the MLS.
Thank you, Shannon.
You're welcome. So it is a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. Veronica.
Yes. So unfortunately, I lost last week for this paragraph. I lost a very big client. So what happened is I put as a compensation 2%, right? And they called me and they asked me why I need to pay 2%. I said, look, in the normal scenario, normally it's the seller, they pay the fee, and normally it's 2.5%, right? And actually I only put 2%. And she said the same thing. She said, no, I'm not willing. I said, it's very weird that they're not going to, put at least 2.5, but it can happen, right? And she said, no, I am not willing to pay you any commission in case the seller, they are not willing to pay. So this is my first time that I heard MLS offering. And actually, I think in this case, that is always better for us to put MLS offering. So the client is not going to ask you every time, why I need to pay this percentage.
So Veronica, if you put MLS offering, there's a couple of challenges there. And I don't want agents to put MLS offering. If you put MLS offering and you go to a builder that doesn't have it in the MLS, then you're not entitled to compensation according to our agency agreement. If you are selling something before it hits the MLS, you're not entitled. If the MLS offering is $1, then you're stuck with $1. If you, and ultimately, the MLS offering is obligating a third party to perform something that's not a party to the contract. So your entire agreement is unenforceable in the end.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean,
okay. So
like,
what is your advice? What we should say? What do you think we should put? Because I was really unaware of what to answer to him, and I screwed up and I lost the client.
I'm going to tell you. So here are a couple things that you can do when you have that conversation. Okay. The first thing that you can explain is that when the compensation is put in the MLS, it becomes a broker to broker issue. So it's not, some buyers have a concern that when it says if the seller doesn't pay, that the buyer has to pay, and they think that it's that it's us physically being able to collect it. And that's not true. It's not a matter of us not physically being able to collect it from the seller. Once it goes into the MLS and there's an offering, it becomes a broker to broker issue. And it's very black and white. I like black and white. So they don't need to worry about that piece, okay? The second piece, and this is the language that I had to write in one time years ago that actually might be helpful to you all now as a more regular option. You can show the clients, the buyers, the compensation in the MLS on the listings before you go out to show the homes, so that they can see that you are being offered by the seller enough compensation to cover your agency agreement. So I had to write that once, and the only time I had to write it was, and I wrote it into the agreement, that the purchasers would be shown the MLS listings to confirm compensation prior to seeing homes, was because it was a referral from an agent in Florida. And so he was reading into that paragraph, right? So I said, no problem. I can show them. It's easy, right? Not a problem. The other thing is that if you're willing to work for a lower compensation that's offered in the MLS, write the lower amount. If you're willing to work for 1%, write that. If you're willing to work for a flat fee as your minimum, write that. So it's up to you, as long as you're consistent in all of your agreements. And quite frankly, if I had a buyer that told me that they weren't willing to compensate me for my time, I would send them on their way. I mean, it's
because they ask me, okay, let's do like this. Let's put an agreement that you are willing to pay 2%, but please, can you send us an email that you are willing, in case on MLS it shows only one, because I explained everything you said, I told to them, I can show you, every time we go to see the house, I already tell to him, because he already said one time this, and I told to him, look, every time we are going to see the house, I can see and I can let you know in case it's less than 2%. He said, it's too much stress every time we need to do that. Why you don't send us an email where you are going to say that in case it's less than 2%, you are not willing to ask nothing to us. He said, I already pay enough right now. The market's up. I'm not willing to pay an extra. Extra percent.
And so you're not, as an agent, you don't have the signature authority, right, to do that. You have to put it on your agency agreement what your minimum is, and then it's binding once I sign it, after the client sign it. And it has to be consistent. So just because you have one difficult client that doesn't want to pay, that actually would get you in more trouble than just deciding that you're going to put whatever the minimum is.
It has to be always for all the clients.
Yes, it does. It has to be consistent. Okay, Christina, you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
No, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Alicia, you had unmuted.
Alicia Strickland?
Yes, Alicia Strickland.
Okay, I didn't know that you saw that, but okay. You got eagle eyes, girl. Yeah, so I mean, Shannon knows I had this happen to me where I found my client found a house that they wanted to go look at, and it was $1 compensation, and I had to consult Shannon because I hadn't come across that yet. And after having a conversation with my client, they decided to not even go see the house because they thought that it was ridiculous that I wouldn't get paid for my time. And I told them I would go show it and we can negotiate. And they were like, absolutely not. So clients matter. Quality clients matter is what I'm trying to say.
Yep. That's a great point. That's just like how I mentioned, we're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing us.
Also, I think it's important how you have that conversation with your clients to set expectations.
Mhm.
And if you have that conversation early enough with them, it'll avoid bigger problems down the line.
Absolutely, Alan. And for anyone that wants to use me in your buyer consultation to say, this paragraph is written poorly, my broker even hates it, and it's on her list for the forms committee to one day get it fixed, right? Like, put them at ease before they see it and before they have a chance to read it. Explain it to them. And, you know, break down their defenses about it, because if you just send it to them and they read it, they're going to be like, no, right? But when you explain what happens in the real world, and you could pull a whole bunch of listings that have already sold in their price range and show them the compensation and say, look, this is the history, and we're in a market where it's a little, you know, touch and go. So things are changing, and I don't think this is going to be an issue. And if there's compensation that's being offered that's less than what I charge, I can show you. If you want me to show you everything, I can show you, or if there's something that's less, right? And then you can decide if you want to still see it. Right? So then the power is in their own hands. So that's my soapbox on that section. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and finish this paragraph for you guys. The broker fee is also earned, due, and payable in a couple of circumstances. So if within blank number of days of the expiration or buyer's early termination, the buyer enters into a contract to acquire property that they saw with you, basically, or were involved in discussions with you about, if it closes, or if you had a contract already on it and it closes after your expiration date, it still applies. So basically the term of the agreement from page 1 is going to automatically extend to the closing date of the contract. So if we had a contract that's ratified today and our agreement expires on March 31st and it doesn't close until April 15th, your agreement's automatically extending. You don't have to do a new one. It automatically extends to the closing date. So this also says that you're protected if your buyer buys a property within blank number of days after the expiration of this agreement and has not entered into an agreement with somebody else. Okay, if they terminate with you and then they go and hire another agent, you don't get commission. Okay, it's just how it goes. But let's say they saw a property and really liked it, meet the seller without your knowledge, buyer and seller decide, hey, look, let's get rid of our agents and work out a deal to save us both money. And that happens in that time frame, right? So if you put within 60 days and they enter into this contract on day 22, you're entitled to compensation. And likely their agent is too, because they're going to have an early termination in this as well. So that's what that's there for. It's there to protect us from buyers and sellers deciding to get rid of their agents and work out a deal amongst themselves. But if they decide they don't want to work with you anymore and you've shown them a home, even if you showed them a home, you ratified a contract, they void on home inspection, house goes back on the market, they are no longer working with you. A week later, they decide, I really want that house. They hire a different agent. And right on that, you still don't get compensation. So it's very tricky when it comes to procuring cause. And this clarifies that if the buyer has entered into a subsequent agreement with another agent, it doesn't qualify. Relocation program. It asks us to disclose whether or not the buyer's in a relocation program. This is important because there's a lot of paperwork involved in that, and generally there is a referral fee that has to be paid by us to their relocation company. All right. With that, I'm going to give you guys a quick break. It has been almost 90 minutes of fun with contracts, right? Let's take 7 minutes and come back at 11:35, and then we'll get into the agency discussion part and wrap up the buyer agency agreement. All right, I will see you guys in a few.
Hey Shannon, for the X days after expiration date, buyers, early termination, et cetera, what is the number you would recommend? 10 days, 30 days, 600 days?
I put 30 days.
Okay.
Yeah, and it can be anything. I mean, I think more than 60 days is probably overkill, but it can be 7 days. It doesn't have to be a long time.
Hey Shannon, quick question, unrelated, if this is free time.
Sure.
For a buyer wants to get out of a contract before home inspection happens, is it okay to have a conversation with the listing agent if you represent your buyer and say, hey, look, they're going to walk tomorrow on the home inspection. Do you want this to go back on the market now, or do you want it to wait until we go through the whole process, or can we agree now just to go ahead and walk? What do you recommend there?
Yeah, I absolutely recommend having that discussion. And if it's in an HOA and you haven't gotten HOA docs, you can just void on that without even any discussion about home inspection. But with regard to the home inspection, having the discussion with the listing agent to say, look, they're going to void after the home inspection anyway. And if you make us do the home inspection, we're sending you the home inspection report, and then you might have disclosure responsibilities. So let's just agree to the mutual release now, and you don't have disclosure requirements and you don't waste any time.
Yeah, that was going to be my conversation. It's a 120-year-old home. I'm like, do you want this report? Because you know it's going to have some stuff on it.
Right. Right.
An agent's a friend of mine, so I don't think it'd be a big deal, but I don't really do that. So I wanted to make sure that was the best way. I would want that up front too, so I could get my home back on the market if I was the listing agent.
Yeah,
so I just felt like it was respectful, and I don't want to waste my client's money to pay for a home inspection that they're going to walk on.
Exactly. And it would just be the release. There would be no notice to void included, just the release.
If we mutually agree now, yeah.
Yep.
Just, yeah, because it's not a notice void, and it's just literally, we agreed to release the deposit.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Yep. Have you learned anything new so far?
Yeah, it's not on now. I was thinking when you said I always put your email in for broker. So I learned that I'm not supposed to put your email in for the broker section. Yeah. But it's really good. I mean, on the commissions, I've seen all of those different ones. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've always just put a standard fee. I do percentage of sale price plus our admin plus our fee plus our plus $3.99 is typically how I do it.
Remind me when we come back to talk about that admin fee thing. I didn't talk about it.
Oh, okay.
And I need to just touch on that real quick. So please remind me when we come back.
And I think that's how you had us do it, right? Just plus whatever your fee is, not plus admin fee, not plus just a flat dollar amount, right?
Yeah, and I need to, so I want to clarify what the risks are on that. Like that is how I think you should write it. And there isn't a really good way to write it. So I just need to explain what could happen with those admin fees for the buyer.
And we waive them anytime there's a VA buyer, anytime there's like, it's one of those things that we're just like, hey, we're let it go. I'm not gonna fight you over $3.99. Like, and VA, you can't even collect it, even though they're willing to pay it. You can't even collect it. So.
Right.
In Virginia, we can't charge.
No, VA financing.
Oh, just kidding. Thank you.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about when we were going over that compensation too. You know, when we find a, you know, so this is kind of a moot point with a VA buyer, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, in that, so I'm gonna have a different class on how to very clearly have the buyers be discussing negotiating for the compensation and not the agents be negotiating for the compensation. If it comes up where the home's already been shown and it wasn't caught, because there is nothing that precludes a buyer from trying to negotiate the compensation, but when it's listed, and that's of course on like the Rex situation that you had, because it was, you know, for close to a for sale by owner situation, but when it's a brokerage listing, it gets a little trickier, and we really do have to look at, the compensation now, unfortunately, especially with VA buyers.
No, alaikum salam.
All right. All right, guys, give me just 1 minute and then we'll get started again.
Alicia, was that seller by owner on MLS $1?
No, it was, Shannon mentioned it. What it was there's this thing called Rex, and they don't use the MLS, but their seller wanted it to be posted on MLS. And so what they do is they don't offer a compensation for a buyer, from what I understand. I could be still wrong. I mean, I was still learning it. And then they paid an agent like, I don't know, $500 to list it into the MLS as a limited agent. And the dollar is was a placeholder from the limiting agent.
So basically what that $1 is the commission, or you don't know, it was unknown?
Well, exactly, because Bright rules state that, you know, when you show a home, you know, you've basically agreed to the commission in the MLS. But, you know, when I talked to Rex, they were like, well, basically you have to negotiate for your own commission when you put in an offer. And my buyers are VA buyers. And when I talked to Shannon, she said, you know, I totally missed this, and whatever class I take about my VA buyers can't pay commissions, right? So it was an interesting topic of conversation.
So you take that and have a conversation with your buyer, and they decided not to see. Okay.
They did, because it was also owner occupied or tenant occupied.
Okay.
And they didn't like the fact that, you know, the tenants could potentially not leave
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah,
like, I
that-
don't even want to deal with that situation. And I'm already annoyed that, this seller wants to do it this way and they're making it really complicated.
Yeah, your buyers, I think, dodged a bullet on that one. Okay, it's 11:37, so we are going to jump back in. I did forget to mention something on the compensation that I want to just touch on real quick before we get into the next piece. And there is one question in the chat that asks about VA buyers and compensation. So VA buyers have certain fees that they are not allowed to pay out of pocket for. And one of those fees that they cannot pay out of pocket for is commission. They cannot pay out of pocket for admin fees. They cannot pay out of pocket for termite inspections. So there are certain things that they cannot pay for. So when we have a situation where there's a VA buyer and then compensation not being offered, reach out to me and I can help you. Alicia's clients happen to be VA buyers, which added another level of a challenge. So that's something that I can help you work through. With the admin fees, I forgot to talk about how agents can reflect admin fees if it's something that you are charging your clients. Again, outside of VA buyers, if you're charging admin fees, it has to be consistent across the board. Virginia allows admin fees to be charged as admin fees if it is a pass-through cost. So as an example, if you have a transaction coordination company, right? So for those of you that are on the Market Center teams, you get this service included, right, for being on the Market Center team. But when you graduate from the Market Center team, this is a service that you would be paying for. So if you added the cost of the transaction coordination as an admin fee to your agency agreements and are passing that through to your clients, you can call it an admin fee and list it on your agency agreements as an admin fee. If it is not a pass-through cost, so if you are on a team, or you have a team as the rainmaker of the team, and you have an assistant that is on salary, and you want to just add this administrative fee to help offset some of the costs, you would list it in the compensation section as whatever the minimum commission you're charging plus $295, $495, $795, whatever it is that you're charging. Now, here's the catch. When it's not that pass-through fee that you can call an admin fee and you're listing it as the additional commission, if you are saying your minimum, let's say, is 2% plus $295, and the seller side is offering 3%, well, you've already collected that. You already collected 2% plus $295 because you got 3%. So a buyer might be hip to that and might say, wait a minute, the seller paid my admin fee because they paid 3%. So be thoughtful in how you are choosing to have fees and costs associated with your agency agreements. Okay, so if it's a buyer agreement and it's not a direct pass-through cost, that you have a receipt that you can show that you paid out that exact dollar amount so that you can call it an admin fee and it has to go as additional commission, you may not be able to have it as additional commission. Okay, if the buyer comes back and says something. So I just want you to be aware. You can do it, but the buyer might catch on. So that's my disclosure there. And not everybody charges the admin fees. It's up to you. Okay. All right. Any burning questions about what we have talked about already before we hit the agency section of the agreements? No? All right. Okay. This next section talks about, it's called disclosure and informed consent. Okay, and this is where the buyer is saying if they do or do not consent to dual or designated representation. I'm going to ask all of you to check the box that the buyer does not consent to dual representation and does consent to designated representation, and explain it to your clients. And they might change their mind about designated, but we as agents can make the determination for the clients that we're not changing our minds about dual. We are not going to do dual representation, okay? So I'm going to explain what the differences are. Designated representation means that two agents that are under KW United can be the agents in the transaction. So one KW United agent represents the buyer and a different KW United agent represents the seller. Steve Gaskins is the principal broker and I am the supervising broker for all three of the Keller Williams offices that are under the KW United umbrella. So that's why they are designated representation. So if you are doing a deal with an agent in a different KW United Market Center from your own, as well as in the KW United Market Center that your license hangs in, you need a designated representation disclosure. Okay, because if there is a challenge in the transaction, it comes to one broker, right, to oversee everything. Their agreements are with the same broker. So that's what designated is. The reason that we want them to consent to designated is because we don't want to eliminate all of the listings for them to see that are listed with KW United. Now, dual is when you, as an individual, would be representing the buyer and the seller in a transaction. And what happens in that situation is that you can't actually advise them. And we have the disclosures that we're going to get into in a few minutes to explain the things that you can and cannot do. All right, but that is how we would like to have those filled out. Okay, compliance with fair housing laws. Properties shall be shown and made available without regard to race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin. I do expect that this will be updated to specifically list out the additional classes that were added in July of last year. It does give the catch-all that it says all protected classes by the United States laws, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and all jurisdictions in the Realtor Code of Ethics. But I think it will list some of the additions. Attorney fees. Okay, basically what this says is, and remember, this is between us and the clients, is that if any party breaches the agreement and the non-breaching party has to go to court, whoever wins gets their attorney fees paid by the other party. This also is the same as in the contract, right? So if somebody defaults and one of the parties in the contract goes to court, whoever wins gets their attorney fees paid by the other party. There is a disclosure for whether the buyer has an active or inactive real estate license, and it doesn't matter what state. We're marking that there because on the contract, it has to be disclosed. And so we need to know up front. Disclaimers. So there's a whole bunch of disclaimers here. Professional services, it's saying that we are only real estate agents. We are not attorneys. We are not tax advisors or lenders or appraisers or surveyors or structural engineers, blah, blah, blah. We're not home inspectors. We want the clients to seek appropriate professional advice regarding any items that fall in these categories, right, where we are not professionals. We can certainly give them questions to ask. We can certainly listen and help them through. And our experience is going to help them to know whether something sounds right or doesn't sound right. But we are not any of these things. So while sometimes you guys come to me with broker questions that are contract related or law related, I might know the answer from a law perspective, and I am going to follow up by saying the client needs to contact an attorney, right? Or I might run it by an attorney. We have awesome attorneys with universal title that we can run things by. We have other attorneys that we can run things by. So we're always double checking with the appropriate professional. Megan's Law. I see some of you still submitting the Megan's Law disclosure on the one-page document. It is not necessary because it's right here in our agency agreement. It's in all of our agency agreements as a paragraph, so that one-page disclosure is no longer necessary. And this is about the buyer and the buyer beware piece. The buyer should exercise due diligence to check for sex offenders on the National Registry and the Virginia Registry if they so choose. The link is here in the agreement. Sellers do not have to disclose the any sex offenders. That's not a disclosure requirement. Wire fraud. So we also have the cybersecurity notice, which I'm going to show you guys, but this is something additional that is a disclosure to talk about. These are talking points with your clients as well in that buyer consultation, right? We're never going to solicit information via email or Facebook Messenger for their private banking information. We are not going to send wire instructions to them unless it's via secured method. So if they are using, universal title for closing and they need to know how to wire their funds, it's going to come to them in a secure message through Qualia. It's not going to be just an email message, right? We're going to have these discussions with them so they know what the appropriate method is. Service provider referrals. This is just a disclaimer about when we provide referrals for service providers. I am going to suggest that we always provide more than one referral for a service provider. There certainly is a way for us to tailor the conversation so that they know who we prefer they contact, and it protects us, right? If we only provide one and the service is subpar or there's a big problem, they're still going to come and look at us, right? They're still going to hold us responsible. So I think that it's just a good practice to give more than one. And this miscellaneous, the agreement and any addenda signed by all parties constitutes the entire agreement. Other provisions, this is where you could write the verbiage that we talked about, that you would show the MLS listings for any listings that are offering less than the agreed compensation. So that would be something appropriate there. If you are paying a referral fee on this buyer, you could be noting that there. There's only a few things that you would be putting in other provisions here. It's most of the time it's blank. And then they've added in big bold letters a reminder that buyers should consult with their agent before visiting any resale or new homes or contacting any real estate agents representing sellers to avoid the possibility of confusion over brokers' relationships. So this is reminding them, don't go to the builder without me, because if you go, the builder's not going to pay my compensation and then they probably won't talk to me, right? And so that's just, again, another talking point during your buyer consultation. So here under buyer agent, this is where your information goes. And here under supervising broker contact information, this is where my contact information goes. And that second sheet that I sent out earlier, this one, buyer and listing broker info, this is where you get the information for it.
May I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
In the buyer presentation that you do with your buyers, you don't go over it this thoroughly, correct? But you do kind of hit some main talking points.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there I was thinking, like, Drew sent us out, and I can't remember if it's the buyer or the listing one, but he kind of highlighted what he does touch on during his presentation. I was wondering, do you have something like that? Or should we just be taking notes when you say that's a talking point?
I will look and see if I still have something that I can send out to you guys from when I was doing the buyer consultations. That's a good question. When I was reviewing this document before I was have them sign it, I was not going through it obviously in detail like this with them. There were certain talking points that would come up during our expectations and needs analysis. So I would have been hitting on certain things already outside of this. You know, for example, I would have already been talking to them about open houses or, you know, here are my cards. So if you want to go to an open house, let me know you're going. I'll let the agent know ahead of time and take my cards, because they shouldn't be contacting you after, they should be contacting me. So take my cards, right? Talking about the builders, that if they wanted to go and tour some new homes, let me know and I could pre-register them if I wasn't available to go with them, or, you know, things like that, that we would be talking about before I got to the document itself. And then I would highlight certain things for them that were on the fill in the blanks so that they would know what they were signing. And I would always tell them, feel free to read it if you want to, and then ask me questions, but here are the highlights for you. Right? And we all know that they are, in most cases, just clicking through it. And if I've already explained the compensation paragraph, then they're good. Now, I have had a couple of buyers that I've worked with in the last year, only one or two, that, and we've done Zoom, right? We've done the consultation in Zoom. And so I've shared my screen and kind of scrolled through the documents real quick with them and just highlighted, right? This is what it looks like. This is what it means. You know, don't be worried about the compensation paragraph. This is how we handle it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to make more work for you at all, but so you don't have to tell me, you know, make one up or anything. I was just wondering if you had that when you were doing these. So
yeah, and I might have something from before that I can, you know, put some notes on and send it out to you guys. I will look.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Sure. Okay, so buyer agency agreement. Everybody good with that? Any questions before we move on to the disclosures? We're going to get through these really quick, these disclosures. Okay, awesome. Let me share my screen again. Okay, all right. Did it put me on the affiliated business disclosure for you guys? Okay, this is the ABA. This is between us and all of our clients that are buyers or sellers. This is not required for landlords or tenants. This is only for sale transactions. And all of this is required by RESPA, and it says that we have an affiliation with Universal Title and Keller Williams Falls Church, and some of its agents have almost 50% interest in Universal Title. So what that means is that the office and some of its agents have a financial benefit when there is a transaction that closes a Universal Title. Now we have an ABA for the other market centers as well, and this will update likely sometime in the next 6 weeks. And it should just seamlessly update in your DocuSign. You won't even really know it. It'll just be a new form that's updated in your folders in DocuSign. The reason that this is required is because of the financial benefit. So they have to disclose what their fees are upfront, and they are licensed in Virginia, DC, and Maryland. Universal Title is, okay? And then the client sign at the bottom. Super simple. Every client has to sign it regardless of who they're going to use, regardless of if they're a buyer or a seller. There are still benefits to buyers and sellers because of our affiliation with Universal Title. And so that's why we have everyone sign it. Okay, it doesn't matter who they're using. It's just a disclosure. This is our cybersecurity notice. The example that I'm using is the Falls Church one. There is one for each market center right now. I am in the process of updating all of the documents that are not different for the market centers to just be one KW United one that has a reference to all 3 market centers. So again, this will change in DocuSign, but you won't ever know that it changed other than you'll see all 3 addresses at the bottom. This is another disclosure that says that the buyer is holding us harmless in the event of a cyber crime or issue that happens that is out of our control, that certain things can happen. And this is required by our E&O insurance. It's telling the clients that we're never going to request that they send funds or non-public information like social security numbers, credit cards, debit cards, bank account information, via email. It's another just talking point reminder. Okay. E&O insurance requires this be signed by all clients, including renters and landlords. This next one is our 4-page deport disclosure statement. This is the long form. So why do I require this for the buyers? I require this because this is a buyer beware state. And on the 1-page document that our buyers have to sign that comes from the sellers, it says that in addition to a couple of other things, what it says is that if the clients, so buyers and sellers, if the clients are being represented by a real estate professional, they have been informed of their rights and responsibilities under the Residential Property Disclosure Act. So, how do we have proof that they have been advised of their rights and responsibilities under the Disclosure Act? Well, we provide them this form and we have them initial the bottom of every page. So this doesn't have a place automatically for them to initial. So in DocuSign, you need to just bring in their initial blocks. So what are the things that are buyers responsible to check? So the buyer is responsible to check on the condition in general. The seller is making no representations about the condition. The seller is making no representations about the adjacent parcels. So what does that mean? That means if something's happening on the next door lot or the lot behind it, the seller doesn't have to disclose that. If the seller knows the lot behind it that is common area right now that has been sold to a developer to build townhouses or, you know, condos or houses, whatever, they don't have to disclose that, right? Now they shouldn't misrepresent and say, oh, beautiful common area, you know, backs to trees, when they know that it's going to get torn down, but they don't actually have to disclose what's happening. Historic district ordinances, the owner makes no representations on any matters that pertain to whether the provisions of any historic ordinance are in effect. Resource protection areas, same thing. Sex offenders, same thing. It all starts out with the owner makes no representations. Dam break inundation zone, wastewater system, solar energy, special flood hazard areas, conservation or other easements, community development authority, marine clays, radon gas that was just added last year, defective drywall, lead pipes, impounding structure or dams. All of this says the owner makes no representations and that the purchasers are advised to exercise whatever due diligence a particular purchaser deems necessary to determine the condition, regulatory status, cost of required maintenance or operation, or other relevant information. Okay, all of that. Owner makes no representations. Now, there are a few things that the seller may need to disclose. So if it is the first sale of the dwelling, there's certain disclosures. If it's in a planning district, if it's in a military air installation, if there are pending building code or zoning violations, properties that were previously used to manufacture methamphetamines, so if it was a meth lab, privately owned stormwater management facilities, if there is an issue regarding the validity of the septic operating permits, those are things that a seller might have to disclose. Now, let's talk about disclosure for a second. These things, these 16 things, might cause a buyer to not want to purchase the home, right? If it's in a historic district and they can't, you know, do something to the property that they want to do. Certain things about the condition, right? They might have issue with. Has flood zones. There might be a challenge. So I would ask you as agents to think about whether these are things that are material facts, causing material defects, material issues, that you would talk to your clients about whether or not it's a best practice to disclose, or whether there's something that has caused an issue, like if it's in a flood zone and the property has flooded and nothing's been addressed to cause the property to not flood anymore, you may need to disclose that it's in a flood zone. There are certain things that, while not required by law, are still a good practice, right? Because you don't need to waste anyone's time. So if you're in a flood zone, your seller can certainly disclose that they're in a flood zone, because there might be buyers scared of flood zones. And so why wait until you get into a situation where they apply for the loan and the lender says, oh, it's in a flood zone, you need flood insurance, and it becomes an issue, right? Like, let's just be upfront. Okay. Useful information about real estate transactions. So this is something that we ask that you send to your clients as an additional document that they can reference later. You can use this as a guide to discuss certain things with them during your buyer consultation. And you don't have to. You can ask them to go back and reference it later. It talks about certain things that make real estate agreements legal. So all contracts must be in writing. So what does that mean if you get a verbal acceptance on your offer, right? It's not enforceable. So you get a verbal acceptance, and while you're waiting for that document to come back for your client's, pending ratification, another offer comes in that's better, and that seller decides to go with it. What can you do? Nothing. There's nothing. So having that conversation that everything has to be in writing to be binding is super important because it sets the expectations. Financing, right? Mortgage rates change daily and sometimes multiple times a day. And this talks about title insurance and things like that, how they might want to learn about that ahead of time. Regular insurance, homeowners insurance, right? It's called hazard insurance, in the industry. And what that is, that they might want to go ahead and investigate what the cost would be ahead of time on certain properties. FIRPTA is important for anyone who is considered a foreign person for purposes of income tax, because a buyer has the responsibility to make sure that the money is withheld. It's actually not the seller, it's the buyer who has the responsibility. So that's important for them to understand FIRPTA. So anyway, this is just a document that I encourage you guys to read and understand, and for the clients to have to read later. And it reiterates certain things that are in the agreements as far as what our roles are.
Can I ask really quickly on the FIRPTA? Yes. Just curious. So if the buyer is foreign and they're making the sale, they don't have to withhold that 15% until they're selling it, and the new buyer then withholds it?
So there are a lot of exclusions. So they might qualify to not have it held, but yes, the purchaser doesn't have to have the money held. It's when they sell, because there might be taxes due from the sale. And of course we don't file taxes except annually. And so that's why they want something withheld once there is a sale that happens. But the buyer, the onus is on the buyer. The IRS is pretty savvy, right? Because if the seller is considered foreign for tax purposes, they might not even live in the United States. So being able to collect that money could be hard. So they're making it the buyer's responsibility to make sure that it's withheld. And it's withheld generally on the settlement statement. But the transaction can't go through unless there is money held. So if there is not enough proceeds from the seller side, then it's actually the buyer's responsibility to contribute that money, or else the sale can't go through. But there are a lot of exemptions, and the title companies are able to go through the worksheet to find out if they are exempt from having that held.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, our next document.
Before you go on, Shannon,
Yes.
This applies to states too. So if you have a Virginia resident who sells an investment property in Maryland, don't let them be surprised when Virginia takes their hunk out of their proceeds at the settlement table for capital gains tax, because they do.
So capital gains is federal.
Yes, and well, the state gets it too. If you're
The
a
state get it?
non-Maryland, yeah, they do. Maryland takes Maryland tax from Maryland income for everybody wherever you live. So you will not see your full proceeds from a Maryland real estate sale. If you don't live in Maryland, they will take their share of the taxes, income taxes, out of your proceeds.
Yeah, but that is separate from FERPTA though.
It is, but if you're a Maryland agent, that's something it wouldn't hurt you to know.
Okay, yes, thank you, Mary. Yeah, so there are, right. So in Maryland, there are different taxes with the transfer taxes and things that they hold.
If
yes.
it's an investment property you've held for a long time, it can be a 5-figure sum.
Yeah.
That you don't realize you won't see.
Yeah, thank you for that. But yes, so please so if they are not, just don't confuse that for these purposes on FERPTA. It doesn't matter if they live in a different state. It's U.S. foreign persons or not for FERPTA purposes. Awesome. So disclosure of dual agency or dual representation in a real estate transaction. So this document takes us into our next section. So the useful information document ends our buyer agency package. Okay, so those were the 5 documents that are required for a complete buyer agency package for you to submit in command. So all 5 of those documents, that's it. There are, and those are required for listings, right? Some of those are duplicate on listings and rentals. So we're not going to go over those again, the ones that are duplicates for those days. Jen, you have a question?
Yeah, so with the ABA at the very top where it says property, are we putting their current address for buyers, or are we putting the property that they're putting an offer on? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, you can put their current address, you can leave it blank. It really is not property specific. So I'm not sure why property's on there because you're having it signed before they have identified a property.
Exactly.
So yeah, so their current address can go there. It can say TBD. It's the only place that it can say TBD in all of our documents. So that's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Can we use the same phrase residential property in Virginia? Just to make it general, like we did on the first page of the buyer agreement?
No, you wouldn't want to do that because it's not the way that it's formatted in DocuSign. You won't be able to do that. It's formatted for an address. Okay. Disclosure of dual agency or dual representation in a real estate transaction. Okay. Because I don't want you doing dual agency, you will not have an opportunity to use this document very much. However, I want you to understand what gives me the challenge with having any of our agents do dual agency. So we're going to go over this document so that I can explain it. At the top, of course, it says that there is a licensee, right? And that's where your name would go, associated with KW United, and then the address of the property. It says that the licensee represents the seller or landlord, the buyer or tenant, and it would always be a standard agent. We don't do anything other than standard agent. We don't do limited service or independent contractor. Now here in section C, it says the firm represents the clients that are both existing clients or one existing client and one new client. It's important to clarify the difference because if both clients are existing clients, then you've already been advising both clients and they already have a different level of service that you've been provided. Dual agency is really in place to allow for situations where both clients are existing clients. If you have a situation where you have clients that are existing clients that fall into something similar to the example I'm going to give you, then come see me. There might be a situation where you can sell me on it, right? it might be an example I had never thought of, and you can sell me on it and I'll be okay with it. In most cases, it's not going to be in the best interest of anybody. So you have a listing in this example that is on the market. It's $500,000, and your seller you've been working with your seller for a couple months, and it's going to go on the market in 2 weeks. All right. You also have a buyer that you met 2 months ago. Their property budget is $300,000. You guys have been looking and looking and looking, and the market's tight, and you haven't been able to find anything. All of a sudden, buyer's great aunt passes away and leaves a large sum of money. So now their budget has increased to $500,000, and they're looking in the same area as your listing. And your listing fits all of the criteria that your buyer has given. And so now they were on different paths, going different directions, but now a circumstance has brought them together. Okay, that's one example. Or you have a listing and some friend refers you to a buyer, right? You meet with the buyer, go through the consultation, right? You met them not through anything related to your listing. Or you have a buyer, you've been working with the buyer, you're referred to a seller that you didn't meet through any type of marketing to try to find a home for your buyer, okay? These are scenarios where it could be considered both clients as existing clients, okay? That's okay. One existing client and one new client is considered an example of you holding an open house on your listing, and a buyer comes in that's unrepresented. And they say, I don't have an agent. Can you represent me to make an offer? And you say, sure, because then you're going to get the buyer commission and the listing commission. Or you have a landlord and the tenant calls and says, I don't have an agent and I want to submit an application. And you say, sure. Those are not the scenarios where dual is supposed to be used, because A, you still get both sides of the commission if a buyer or tenant is not represented, okay? And B, you've already been representing your seller and your landlord. So why would you say, oh, sorry, client, I know I was already representing you, and now I'm going to stop, and I'm not going to give you any advice anymore because I want to get both sides of the commission because I didn't understand, right? In a dual agency situation, you're having the clients acknowledge these following statements. It says, at the commencement of dual agency or representation, the licensee cannot advise either party as to the terms to offer or accept in any offer or counteroffer. However, the licensee may have advised one party as to terms prior to the commencement of dual agency or representation. The licensee cannot advise the buyer or tenant client as to suitability of the property, its condition, other than required disclosures by law, and cannot advise either party as to what repairs of the property to make a request. The licensee cannot advise either party in any dispute that arises relating to the transaction. The licensee may be acting without knowledge of the client's needs, knowledge of the market, or client's capabilities in dealing with the intricacies of a real estate transaction. And either party may engage another licensee at additional cost to represent their respective interests. So that all says, I can do nothing for you, buyer and seller, except pass information back and forth and hope that you know what you're doing. And I still get all the commission, right? So I don't believe that that's ever in anyone's best interest. I don't believe that that's ever in any client's best interest, and I don't believe it's in your best interest. So I'm going to explain a little bit about what the listing agreement says, and we'll go over it again in more detail on Wednesday. The listing agreement says that the seller is going to pay a total amount to KW United. And in the event that there is a buyer agent, the buyer agent will get a portion of KW United's commission. Okay, KW United will share a portion. If there is not a buyer agent, then we don't have to share that commission. We still get the total. So I firmly believe that it's better if we are representing a seller to have the buyer, if they don't want an agent, be unrepresented. I don't think that it's good for us to say to our seller, I'm going to stop advising you, and I'm not going to advise the buyer, right? We've already been advising the seller, and I think they expect to have that level of representation. So the same thing goes if we have a buyer and the seller is a for sale by owner. We're not going to then start representing the seller and enter into a dual agency agreement, right? The seller is just going to remain a for sale by owner and be unrepresented. And we are going to represent the purchaser only. Okay, who has questions about dual representation? And does anybody want to challenge my opinion on dual? Does anybody not see where I'm coming from on that?
Okay, so I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kat.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, so say for example, I have a buyer, right, that's looking in Annapolis, Maryland, and then I'm meeting with a for sale by owner in that area. And I know that it meets the criteria of my buyer. So how do I, so do I need to have somebody else then represent the for sale by owner?
Well, this for sale
if
by
it becomes
owner,
a listing?
yeah, if you want it to become a listing and the for sale by owner wants to be represented, then yes, somebody else would represent them and you would still represent the buyer. But if the for sale by owner still just wants to represent themselves, then they can still be unrepresented.
Okay, thank you.
The other challenge is if you're on a team, when this dual agency kind of situation could come into play, because we have some teams that are set up where everything is very separate, where there's a listing agent or listing agents, and then there are buyer agents, and they don't cross over into knowing about each other's clients. But if you have a situation where your team is set up that everybody knows about everyone else, right? So the buyer agents are working and know about personal information, confidential information about the sellers, then the buyer agent cannot represent potential purchasers for your listings, because that becomes dual agency, because the buyer agent knows too much about the seller. Okay, that would be dual agency. As soon as that buyer's agent crosses over, it's not designated anymore. Okay, so as long as it's all separate and the clients don't know about each other, you're good. So keep that in mind if you're on a team.
Shannon, I have a question for you, please.
Yes, Gary.
All right, so I have a listing. I bring, you come in to look at the listing. This is a rental listing, and you don't like the rental. And you ask me if I can help you find additional properties, and we do that. We look at 5 properties. You come back and say, and I've now have an exclusive right with them. And now they come back and say, you know, the first property you showed me, I'd like to list it because I have a situation like that right now. What's the best way to handle that? Because now I have an exclusive right, and I have to list and to show. Pass that on to somebody else.
Okay. Yeah, that is what I would suggest. On a rental, it's not as difficult. However, there still is a level where our landlords are going to want some advice on how they, set up criteria so that they can be consistent on how they're accepting and reviewing applications and things like that. So you might need to bring somebody else in, and if the seller, in that case, the landlord might know at that point that you've already been now working with them, and they could be considered an existing client, and so your landlord might be okay with you not being able to give them any advice.
And with this particular listing client, he owns like 12 properties. Does my agreement with him change because he has so many properties, or should we wait till we talk tomorrow to that?
Yeah, it wouldn't change based on how many properties he owns, your agreement with him.
Okay.
So the disclosure of designated representation that I touched on earlier is simply saying that the principal or supervising broker is the same for the agents that are involved in the transaction. So this would go with your contract. Okay, this would be an addition to your contract and part of your ratified package. This should not be a separate document. So it goes with any ratified contract where the agents are in Kingstown, Falls Church, or Fredericksburg. It does not go with any other Keller Williams office, only those 3 market centers. And again, it's to clarify for the clients that in the event there's an issue that arises, it's coming up to the same supervising or principal brokers, and that their agreements are in place with us, with the same entity. And then the disclosure of brokerage relationship for unrepresented parties. This is a very misused document in our forms library. This one says the undersigned unrepresented parties do hereby acknowledge disclosure that the licensee, right, you, associated with KW United, represents only the following party in the residential real estate transaction, and you put the property address, okay? So you have a seller, buyers unrepresented. You're going to check the box that says seller, and only the buyers will sign this, because only the parties that are not represented sign this. Likewise, if you are representing the landlord, only the tenant sign this. If you are showing a for sale by owner, you are going to check the box for buyer, and you are going to have the seller, the for sale by owner seller, sign this. So you're having them acknowledge that while you are communicating with them, you represent somebody else. This document is not signed by the party that is represented by you, and this document is not signed by the other side of the transaction that has representation. it is only for the party that does not have representation under an agency agreement. This document is the one-time showing agreement for sales. I have a one-time showing agreement for rentals. If you need it, that I have copied from this and changed it to be appropriate to rent and not sale. And basically what this says is that the seller is offering the home at a list price of blank, and that the owner is agreeing to pay compensation to us if the purchaser that's listed here on this document makes an offer and is ratified, right? This document is not transferable to other purchasers. So if you have 5 purchasers that are interested in this FSBO's document, this FSBO's property, you have to have it signed for all of the buyers that you're taking to see it. It's only enforceable for the purchasers that are listed here. So you need to talk to the seller before you go and show the home and see how much money they are offering in compensation. It says that the parties understand that the broker is only representing the purchaser. They are also acknowledging the receipt of that disclosure of brokerage relationship for unrepresented parties. Okay, so that's that document before. So you're sending this and the disclosure of unrepresented parties to them to sign prior to showing. The owner is signing it, and I am signing it before you go see it. Okay, any questions about those documents before we get to the last document of the morning?
So that document that you just showed us, Shannon, that would be for FSBO, basically?
Yes, that is what it's for, a FSBO. No questions? That means I'm either boring you guys or I did a really good job explaining all of those documents. I'll go with the latter. All right, the last document that we are going to talk about today is the buyer's acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences. So I've talked about this document before, and it's very important to me. I'm talking about it on the buyer consultation day because I think that you can review this document with your clients on multiple occasions. You can do it during your buyer consultation if you choose to review contract and offer documents with them during your buyer consultation. I highly suggest reviewing the contract and offer documents with your clients prior to showing homes so that they are prepared for what everything says and means before it's a fire drill to get those offers out. Okay, I don't think that the day that you have shown homes and they say, I love this one, I want to make an offer, is the time to be reviewing what the contract says. So whether it's during your initial buyer consultation or right after you schedule a second appointment after they've signed the agency agreement, I do think that the documents should be reviewed prior to seeing the homes. This is something that I would like to see signed from every purchaser that is waiving one of the general contingencies in their offers. And I would like to see it added. They would sign it on the day that they're doing their offer. It does not go with the offer. And I would like to see it added into the buyer agency folder in command. So you would already have an approved buyer agency folder, and you would go in and you would add that document as an additional document so that we have it in there for it's a CYA document, basically. And what it says is that this acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences is signed concurrent with an offer submitted by the buyers, dated whatever date, for a property located, whatever the property is they're offering. The buyer is represented by you of KW United. Then it goes on to say, in submitting an offer, certain contract provisions may be waived or not utilized, some of which are referenced below. The buyer's decision regarding these and other contract terms may lead to potentially adverse consequences. Broker can retain counsel on real estate matters, but buyers advised to seek legal counsel and other appropriate professional advice regarding such potentially adverse consequences. Despite the risk of potentially adverse consequences, buyer elects to submit an offer and ultimately ratify a purchase agreement for the property without the following. Check all that apply. And then it gives you a spot for other, where you can add something that they did that isn't listed here. So they waived a financing contingency. They've waived an appraisal contingency or home inspection or radon. They've waived a well or water test. They've waived a septic inspection or a contingency on the sale or settlement of their property. In other, something that they might put there would be if they have offered significantly above the list price, or if they have used an escalation addendum, I would say that would go in other. This document is our CYA document and an additional time to talk to the clients about what it means to waive one of these contingencies. Now, next week on Monday, we are doing offer documents, and we are going to talk about these contingencies and what they mean. And so we will get it into a deeper dive of what each of these contingencies is, so that you'll know how to explain those to your clients and what the potential adverse consequence is if they waive these. But this is another talking point about what happens. What happens if you waive your finance contingency and you don't have cash in the bank to get to closing? What does that actually mean? What does it mean if you try to waive your appraisal contingency on a VA loan, right? What do those mean? And that's our last document for this morning. So I am going to open it up right now to questions about any of the documents or anything that I have said so far this morning. Samantha, you were quick to unmute. You are my first questionee.
Sweet. So for this last document, the adverse consequences, this is a document I guess you should be seeing a lot more right now, considering the type of offers most agents are putting in for these crazy banana offer wars or whatever's happening, because a lot of people are waiving several contingencies.
Yes, I should see it pretty much on every single offer that is ratified for our buyers.
Cool. And I forgot the other half of that question, so I'll be back.
All right. Who's next?
So this it's Z. This document, hi Shannon. This document is to be added to the package that goes to you, but not to the seller agent.
That's right. So in command, you will, in the buyer folder where it says consultation, that will have already been submitted to me and approved, right? Before you get to the contract stage, because you will have submitted before you go show homes, right?
Yes.
Everything in command, and I will have approved it. So you'll go back and add that document to the consultation folder.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else? If there aren't burning questions, I will start taking ahas. I need 3 ahas before I actually let you go today. So
I have a question not related to the documents, so I'll follow up with that at the end.
No, you can ask. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, because I just had a quick question about I guess representation. So I have a buyer. Well, I have a husband and wife who want to buy a home. They live in New Jersey. Their daughter is down here. Their daughter wants to be the one seeing the homes and everything like that. But obviously, before I can show homes, I need to have someone in a contract. It behooves me to have a buyer representation with her, and while we show the homes, and then once their parents are like, oh yeah, let's buy that one, I maybe create another agreement between all 3 of them, or just the parents, or I guess what's the best way to navigate this, because the daughter is going to be the one, and we're likely going to get a POA to transact down here. What would be the best course of action for facilitating that kind of thing?
I would say, I think the buyer agreement to start should be in all 3 names, and electronic signatures are easy, so you can send it to them through DocuSign. They all can sign.
So they're elderly, and there is a very large. So suffice it to say, Amy will be driving up to Jersey to have her parents physically sign documents, because even getting them on a Zoom was an adventure. And they only want to sign things physically. So I was thinking, and I guess my train of thought was that in the case of like getting an offer put together for a home, if they're in Jersey, like overnighting and coming back and then putting the offer in and things like that, time-wise, it wouldn't work out so well. If like e-signing were not really an easy way to go about it, what?
Sure. So in this case, I'd say go ahead. She can take a paper copy and have everybody sign it, and then a POA is good, and we can talk offline about the specifics. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Absolutely. Alicia Strickland, you're unmuted.
Oh, I am. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you didn't.
But I do have. I didn't mean to, but I do have ahas because I wrote them down just in case nobody said anything.
All right. Let's hear some ahas from you.
It was in the first when you talked about multiple buyers, and then they were putting the offers in on the same property. I can't even fathom that at this moment, but I hope I never have to run into that. But it's good to know if I ever do.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Jen Cook, you are unmuted.
Yeah, I was gonna say my aha moment was pretty much page 2, top section of the agreement. I learned a lot. So yeah, there's a lot of them. I think my biggest one was the fact that we can ask them specifically like to prove that they can afford to buy the house. I didn't realize that we could be like inquire about their financial situation. So that was big for me.
Awesome. Who else has some ahas? I love hearing from you guys, the experienced agents and the agents that have attended this class before.
Shannon.
Hi, Gary.
I'll give you an aha. I have a lot of people that at one time or another go to see a builder, and I've always encouraged them to let me set up the appointment and go, and sometimes they do it without my knowledge. And I've never had anyone buy one, but that just really worries me because I think it really depends on the builder as to how you're going to be taken care of. I literally had a referral to another realtor, happened unfortunately to be a Keller Williams realtor, and they walked in, no card, no anything. It was down in the Richmond area, and I then sent a referral, and the guy said, they're my clients, they're not your clients. So I will never refer that agent again, but it's not totally their fault. I guess my client didn't do it. I like your thing about established business hours. I don't do that. I should do that. And I also picked up on I've been giving your email address for the office address, which I will change now, but take it from there. And then I have a question for you. I'm still totally confused about compensation 8B. So what do you suggest we put in there? So I have my, my gold package, my platinum package, my coal package, whatever. But what number do I put in there?
So I don't want to tell you what number you have to put in there. I think that I think a lot of you don't get compensated as much as you should for as hard as you work. So I think that is a challenge that we have right now. It really just needs to be consistent across the board and where your comfort level is. So what I will say to that is decide what your risk is that you're willing to take at the low end, and decide what you are comfortable with communicating to your clients that your value is. So if you are willing to take 0, then put 0, right? Because anything that is offered above 0, you're able to collect. And if you're willing to take the risk that there is a $1 offering or a FSBO that's not going to pay you, then you're going to be volunteering your time for that client. And if you feel that you're able to communicate your value, which I think you should, because all of you are worth a lot more than 0, then we need to be comfortable putting that on our agreement. I don't believe that buyers should be engaging us for free. I understand that there is a history of sellers, right, paying us, but remember, they're paying us out of the proceeds from the sale, which means the buyers are paying us because it's just in the sale price. Does that make sense to everybody? So I can't tell you what to put. I can tell you that it is hard if you put a number that is above what we're seeing being offered as co-broker commission in the MLS right now. So be aware of that, and be aware of the zeros, right?
So a follow-up question is, if I put in, let's say 2.5%, and it ends up that the MLS through the listing agreement, they're going to pay me 2%. Contractually, the brokerage, because Steve basically is the guy, or Keller Williams is the guy, can they go after the buyers for the extra half point if I don't, or can I waive that myself if I want to?
So you can't waive that.
With your permission.
Steve or I technically would have to sign something that waives it. So that's why we encourage you to put the minimum that you're willing to work for, because then you don't have to go into that discussion with the clients that says, I'm gonna, you know, I have to go ask if I can waive that, right? And then it's, who am I waiving it for? Am I waiving it for you, but not someone else?
Got it. Okay.
Right? So being aware of what's happening, and that also goes for broker credits, right? When we're issuing broker credit letters, you know, I want to make sure that you guys are aware of the consistency or inconsistency with how these credits are being given, and the reasoning, right? It has to be duplicatable, right? It has to be for a reason that would be duplicatable if the scenario came up again. So I just think, I think in our market, you know, 2% is probably a good high number that you wouldn't run into having to charge the difference, if that's the minimum that you're willing to charge based on what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, Shannon, I'll add one more thing. You helped me. We ratified a contract last week that the sellers or the buyer's agent came to us. He's written 12 contracts for his buyers that he was outbid on every one of them. And so in today's way, and I have 2 or 3 buyers right now, I'm dreading doing that because I know we're going to write contract after contract if we're not careful, with absolutely no payment. And they might at some point to say, you know, we're going to rent a property. We're just not even going to buy it. We're tired of it. So, I mean, that for new agents and for people that haven't done it a lot, I mean, that's really important to know that I mean, we're worth a lot of money in time.
Yeah, we are. And that buyer consultation is super important. We're setting the expectation with the buyers up front of our value. Right from that first appointment, we're showing them our value. The time we take running them around to see properties and writing offers that don't get accepted, that's not where they're going to see our value. They see our value and right up front, and then we solidify the value as we're working with them through the transaction, right? But we need to show it to them through that needs analysis right up front. Awesome. All right. Are there any last ahas? At the front door. Maybe someone at my front door has an aha. I don't know. Joys of working from my kitchen island. All right. Nothing. All right. Ty has a request.
I really appreciate all of you guys. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Tyler Holloway. I'm the director of production down in Fredericksburg. And are y'all enjoying this class? Y'all
Yeah.
getting information out of it? Good.
Shannon's great. I've done boot
hoping
camp before and it wasn't Shannon. And I played solitaire the whole time because it was so boring. And this is so much better.
Well, can I get you all to do me a favor, especially some of you that have clicked your screen off? I would love to get a picture of all of us. If you can just throw up a peace sign, a heart, whatever, and a smile. I didn't want to take one while we were all looking confused, right? Because I do the same thing. I sit there on Shannon's call and go, and I didn't want to post anything that had somebody looking like that. So if I can get you real quick to put your camera on, and I'll give you a 3, 2, 1, and then we'll go ahead and get this done, okay? All right, so 3, 2, 1, smile. All right, thank you so much. Y'all are wonderful. I'm glad y'all having a good time, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you so much.
Thank
as
you,
always.
Shanna.
So tomorrow you guys are going to be doing some rentals in the afternoon with Jeff Schwartzman of SGS. So he's going to give you all you need to know to be successful in your rental side of your business. And then we will go over listings on Wednesday morning. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and If you need me, you know how to reach me.
Shanna, we
Thank you,
won't have
Shannon.
class tomorrow?
Tomorrow's class is rentals, and it's in the afternoon at 1 o'clock with SGS and Jeff Schwartzman.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Shannon.
It's a good time to reach out to you.